Sócrates on falling in love. Vertical bar, love is a risk. Love is always a gamble. There are no guarantees, no contracts that shield our souls from the wounds of affection. Yet, we persist in diving in, fully aware that we might lose ourselves. Have you ever considered that love, this emotion we hold in such high regard, can also be the greatest source of illusion? How often do we confuse desire with truth, attachment with virtue, passion with wisdom? Socrates would argue that it's precisely in love where self-knowledge is most revealed, because no one can escape the mirror of their own contradictions when faced with another. What you're about to discover today may not be what you expect, but it might just be what you need. After all, what if love isn't about finding someone else, but about discovering yourself? What you uncover could change everything. The mirror of love, illusion or truth. Love is like a crystal-clear lake. From a distance, its surface reflects the beauty of the sky. But as we get closer, we realize the water also distorts our image. How many times do we think we're looking at someone else when, in reality, we are just gazing at our own need to be loved? Ignorance begins here, confusing projection with reality. In modern life, this is almost the norm. Social media has turned affection into digital displays. We post public declarations, seek likes as proof of love, and, without realizing it, trade the depth of connection for the anxiety of validation. We live the consequences of this confusion. Fragile relationships built more on appearances than on truth. Socrates warned us, "Know thyself." Without self-awareness, love becomes a prison of illusions. When we fail to recognize our own needs, we place the impossible burden on another to fill a void only we can address. The result? Frustration, resentment, and escape. But there's a way out. Philosophy invites us to constant reflection. To question not only who the other person is, but also who we are when we love. What are we seeking? What do we fear losing? What do we project? This kind of questioning opens the door to a freer love, where the virtue lies not in possession, but in sharing. Aristotle reminded us that true friendship is based on mutual good, not mere utility or immediate pleasure. Love should be the same, a pursuit of virtue, where each person becomes an ally in the other's growth. It's not easy, but it's liberating. And perhaps the greatest wisdom lies in admitting that loving is indeed risky. But not loving can be even more dangerous. The loneliness of never confronting your own reflection. Have you ever realized when you confused true love with the illusion created by your own soul? Share your thoughts in the comments. The addiction of love. Neediness or virtue? Imagine love as a strong wine. A sip warms, inspires, brings pleasure. But when we drink without moderation, what was once a virtue transforms into an addiction. Ignorance emerges when we confuse intensity with depth. And so, we believe that the more we give ourselves, the more genuine love becomes. Is that really true? In everyday life, this shows up as suffocating attachment, incessant messaging, the need to always be present, not by choice, but out of fear of absence. How many relationships sink because, instead of allowing space to grow, they turn into cages? Love, in this form, ceases to nourish the soul and becomes a psychological prison. The consequences are clear: anxiety, jealousy, control, and a loss of self. Socrates taught that the unexamined life is not worth living. If we don't scrutinize our way of loving, we end up repeating destructive patterns. Modern studies on emotional dependency confirm this. Excessively attached relationships function like chemical addictions, activating the same brain reward circuits. It's science echoing philosophy. Loving without reflection can be as dangerous as any drug. So, what's the philosophical solution? Learning to transform love into a path of self-discovery. Loving without losing individuality. Being together without dissolving. The virtue lies not in being everything for the other, but in creating space for both to flourish. As Seneca said, "Those who do not know how to live alone do not know how to live in company." In today's world, where the culture of the perfect couple is showcased in every story and photo, perhaps true wisdom lies in swimming against the tide. Understanding that love also means accepting imperfection, silence, and space. Healthy love is not fueled by the fear of losing, but by the trust in staying. Thus, the central question is, are we loving as an exercise in freedom or as a desperate attempt to fill a void? Because, deep down, only those who find peace within themselves can offer peace to others. Have you ever found yourself trapped in the addiction of love, confusing neediness with virtue? Share your reflections in the comments. The cave of love. Social illusion or inner reflection? Plato spoke of the famous cave. Prisoners chained, looking at shadows on the wall, believing that was reality. Love, in our time, often functions this way. Ignorance manifests when we accept the ideal love model sold by soap operas, movies, or perfect feeds. Shadows that seem real, but are mere projections. Everyday life proves this. How many believe they will only be happy when they find the soulmate? How many judge their own story because they don't live romances like those in series? The result is devastating. Frustration, constant comparison, and a feeling of inadequacy. Love becomes a stage where we perform, but rarely live authentically. Sócrates, however, invites us to leave the cave. He didn't promise easy answers, but posed questions that illuminate. What is love? What do we seek in it? Is it desire, virtue, soul, or all of that together? When we dare to reflect, we see that love is not a social standard, but a unique experience that can only be revealed through self-knowledge. Modern philosophy and psychology walk hand in hand on this point. Studies show how the phenomenon of social comparison on social media increases anxiety and dissatisfaction in relationships. When we believe our lives should mimic others, we distance ourselves from the truth of our own experiences. The philosophical solution is to take the risk of looking beyond the shadows. It's not about rejecting romantic love, but recognizing that it cannot be shaped by external expectations. A true encounter only happens when two souls allow themselves to be authentic, not when they try to play pre-written roles. Therefore, the challenge is this: leaving the cave requires courage. It demands enduring the bright light of reflection and the discomfort of questioning. But only then can we trade shadows for true forms. Have you ever caught yourself living love as a projected shadow instead of an experienced truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. The abyss of love. The unexamined life. Love can be likened to a suspended bridge over an abyss. On one side, the promise of fulfillment. On the other, the risk of falling. Ignorance occurs when we cross this bridge blindfolded, driven only by the impulse of passion. And how many of us do just that? We rush to love without reflecting, as if love were a shortcut to happiness. The consequences are brutal. Unexamined loves become automatic relationships. We repeat patterns of jealousy, attachment, and pride. Like puppets, we follow scripts we never chose. We live, but we don't think about what we live. As Socrates warned, the unexamined life is not worth living. The same logic applies to love. Unexamined love can turn into a silent prison. What if everything we call love is just an illusion? What if we confuse need with virtue? What if we never truly knew ourselves before giving away our hearts? Each of these questions is a blow that shatters the comfortable mask. Philosophy doesn't spare us discomfort, but it's in that discomfort that truth is born. Plato told us that eros, love, is also a daemon, a guide between the human and the divine. But how can we trust a guide we don't understand? The answer lies in self-knowledge. Only those who confront their own souls can distinguish desire from true virtue. Love, in this sense, is not just an encounter with another, but a confrontation with oneself. Stoic philosophy reinforces this point. Epictetus asserted that we do not suffer from facts, but from the interpretations we make of them. The same goes for love. We do not suffer from the absence of the other, but from the expectations we create. We do not suffer from jealousy, but from the fear of loss we project. Suffering arises from what we do not examine. And here we reach the climax. Love is the most dangerous and, at the same time, the most necessary of human experiences. Because to love is to risk losing. To love is to risk changing. To love is to risk discovering oneself. Yet, not loving is to die while alive. The bridge over the abyss will always be before us. The question is, will you cross it blindfolded, or with the light of reflection? Have you ever wondered if the love you live is examined or merely endured? Share your thoughts in the comments. Vulnerability as courage. Loving with limits and freedom. Loving is like walking along the edge of a rushing river, where the water seems inviting, but the current hides whirlpools. Ignorance happens when we confuse vulnerability with weakness, when we think that opening our hearts is the same as handing over the keys to our souls. The consequence is predictable: fear of showing ourselves, rigid masks, relationships that remain superficial. Socrates, if he saw us hesitating on the shore, would ask with his irony, "What do you fear losing, if not an illusion about yourself?" Wisdom begins when we admit that courage is not the absence of fear, but walking despite it, keeping the questioning alive like a torch. Truth doesn't arrive with a shout. It approaches when we accept to hear what we would prefer to silence. In everyday life, the scene repeats. Dating apps stack conversations, but we rarely listen in earnest. We send good morning in bulk, but tremble at a "can I be honest?" We avoid discomfort with a "I'll respond later," and resort to ghosting when reflection threatens to expose our own limits. The consequence is emotional fatigue that turns us cynical. The soul becomes defensive, virtue shrinks, and self-knowledge stagnates. Research in relational psychology speaks of bids for connection, small gestures of closeness, and shows that ignoring them erodes the bond over time. In philosophical terms, neglecting the small is dismissing where truth often hides. "I know that I know nothing," is Socrates' most quoted phrase. In the context of love, it becomes an ethic of presence, not presuming intentions, asking before concluding, verifying before judging. It's the Socratic method applied to affection, birthing ideas and feelings through the art of patient questioning. When we practice this, vulnerability shifts from being an unrestrained confession to a lucid encounter. Aristotle would remind us, friendship, and by extension love, flourishes when we seek the good of the other as a good in itself, not as a mirror of our narcissism. Virtue is not submission. Virtue is a measured approach. Phronesis, practical wisdom. Ignorance here often whispers two lies. If you show who you are, they will leave, and if you protect yourself, you will never suffer. The first traps us in performance, the second in loneliness. The consequences are evident on social media. Social comparison, digital anxiety, emotional consumerism, trying to heal with novelties what only reflection can cure. Epictetus nudges us. We do not suffer from facts, but from the meaning we assign to them. In love, we suffer less from "they didn't respond," and more from the narrative we create about our own lack of worth. The philosophical solution? Rewriting the narrative with self-awareness, replacing the fantasy of control with the practice of presence. How do we do this practically without turning it into a self-help manual? With clear human agreements, setting times and spaces, admitting limits, naming fears, celebrating small progress. Contemporary studies on habits show that lasting changes depend on consistent micro-commitments. In love, this translates to choosing a minimal routine of care, a weekly screen-free meeting, an honest check-in after conflicts, a brief ritual of sincere gratitude that retrains the heart. Seneca would say, "Hasten slowly. The rush of daily life and the marathon of series can wait. Listening cannot. The truth of connection is born from small gestures repeated with virtue. However, the path is not linear. There will be setbacks, misunderstandings, and relapses into old patterns. Ignorance returns disguised as certainty, and the consequence may be harsh tones, prideful stances, or silence as an escape. Philosophy responds with trained humility, apologizing without theatrics, reopening dialogue, returning to the foundational question, "What do I really seek in love?" and re-establishing the thread of reflection. Here, vulnerability reveals its strength. Admitting that we don't know everything is what allows us to learn something. The river keeps flowing. We learn to swim better. And what if, at its core, vulnerability is another word for freedom? Freedom from performing, from collecting proofs, from turning the other into a certifier of our identity. Freedom to recognize that the soul expands when truth finds space, and that wisdom flourishes when virtue has roots in self-knowledge. The unexamined life is not worth living, echoes Sócrates, and unexamined love is not worth promising. The next step is to balance courage with tenderness, limits with care, reason with presence. Loving is a risk, yes, but it's also the place where we grow together, if we dare to think and feel. What small act of vulnerability, concrete and actionable, can you introduce into your way of loving today? Share in the comments. Love as a school for the soul, between ignorance and wisdom. Loving is like entering an invisible classroom, where every gesture is a lesson and every silence is a test. Ignorance occurs when we believe that love is a ready-made diploma, magically handed over when we find someone. Many live this way. They expect love to solve all dilemmas, heal all wounds, and provide answers effortlessly. But, as in any school, there's no wisdom without practice, without mistakes, without reflection. Loving is learning, and learning requires patience. The consequence of treating love as an automatic destination is repeated failure. Relationships are interrupted like canceled series, swapped for new seasons with different partners, without the soul having matured. The fast-paced routine of modernity, with a rush for everything, even feelings, turns love into a disposable product. Studies show that the dopamine from novelty, activated by dating apps, creates cycles similar to consumerism, always wishing for the next thing, without deepening the present. It's philosophy colliding with behavioral psychology. We seek fulfillment in what is, by definition, fleeting. Sócrates insisted that virtue arises from questioning. He who does not know what he seeks does not recognize when he finds it. In love, this maxim is brutal. Without self-knowledge, we repeat errors like students who don't pay attention to the lessons. And here lies the philosophical solution: transforming love into a school of reflection. Loving is not just feeling, it's also thinking about what we feel. It's asking, what in me grows with this bond? What in me shrinks? Am I practicing virtue or merely fleeing from solitude? Aristotle reminded us that happiness, eudaimonia, is not in immediate pleasure, but in the flourishing of the soul in virtue. Love can be one of the most fertile spaces for that flourishing, provided we don't treat it as a distraction, but as an ethical exercise. When we choose to cultivate patience, exercise listening, and practice gratitude, love shifts from being just an emotion to becoming lived philosophy. At this point, the relationship is no longer just companionship, but transforms into a path of shared self-discovery. In the contemporary world, where digital anxiety erodes attention, loving demands almost revolutionary courage. The courage to silence notifications to hear the other's silence. The courage to not measure the value of a gesture by the number of likes. The courage to prefer the painful truth over the comfortable lie. In this sense, love swims against the current of time. While haste devours, true connection asks for pause. While consumption demands more, the philosophy of love asks for less. Less illusion, less mask, less ego. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: love is not the end of the search, but the place where the search intensifies. It's not the arrival, it's the journey that demands the most self-knowledge, reflection, and virtue. It's where the soul reveals itself as fragile and, precisely for that reason, capable of growth. Sócrates would remind us, wisdom begins in the admission of ignorance. To love, therefore, is to admit that we don't know everything, but that we are willing to learn. It's a risk, but also the most beautiful of human possibilities. Have you treated love as a school for the soul, or as fleeting entertainment? Share your thoughts in the comments. Loving is choosing the education of the soul. By traversing the risk, we discover that wisdom arises from questioning, that truth requires silence, and that virtue is practiced in small gestures. Sócrates reminds us, life and love are worth examining. If the bond invites you to self-knowledge, then philosophy has ceased to be an idea and has become a path. It's not about conquering the other. It's about conquering your own illusions. Breathe. Reflect. Decide with presence. Reflection does not cancel feeling. It purifies. May your next step be simple and honest. Less mask, more truth. Less noise, more attention. Leave a question you will ask yourself today in the comments and come back to share what changed. If this script served as your mirror, subscribe and share with those who need this conversation. The next step may reveal something even deeper.